Welcome everybody to the final installment of this tutorial, and we're going back into Photoshop. I've placed the file and I've set my mode to overlay, and I've duplicated it, and the one underneath it I've set to multiply and dropped it to 50%. Now I'm adjusting the levels here because I want to keep my darks and lights together, and now I'm doing an overlay tone. Now this overlay tone, I usually, for most stuff, I base it on Teresa's skin color because it's a nice warm kind of tan, and I dropped that to 25%. But I decided to experiment a little bit here, so now I'm using purple tone instead and testing out different stuff visually to see how it looks. This is where all the coloring comes in. It gets rid of the gray tone, and I've started pushing the light and dark a little bit to try and come up with a different color here, just a little bit, and I'm tinkering with the brightness and contrast to get a better mix of light and shadow. Now the reason I use a different color to lay over the multiply layer is the overlay affects all the colors underneath, so it effectively just blends it together. But with the multiply, I'm able to take it out of that black and white gray tone and give it kind of a warmer look or a cooler look depending on what color I choose for the overlay. Now here I'm going in and I'm adding the stripes to the candy canes, and I'm doing this on a clipping mask layer to the flats, which is below all my shading, so all my shading will affect any of the new stuff I add in. So I'm adding just basically the stripes and colors and things like that, so no big deal there. With this, I thought it was a really fun method to put together the candy canes in the end and tie it all in. Now, a couple of things that I'm going to do is I use Photoshop for some touch-ups because Chris's dress is not quite the texture in look that I want. So here I'm adding a new layer, and I think I'm color picking just to see what I got here, and I'm using I actually had to shut off the upper layers to see if I was getting the color that I wanted. So it's getting me a little bit of an effect, and I don't want it to be too strong, but I want it to just kind of help make the lighter spots on the dress pop just a little bit more. And I'm using the brush, if I recall correctly, in lighten mode. A very soft brush, right around 10 to 20%. And I'm using that just to kind of bring out, the sheen on the dress just a little bit more, because I wanted to make that dress pop visually. And this is one of those things where you can sit here and tinker and tweak with this stuff all day long, and you'll see here where the dress is starting to kind of really pop a little bit more. It's starting to take on a little bit more of a shiny texture, which is closer to what I was wanting for her dress. Depending on what you're doing with your textures and stuff, after you come out of SAI and you go back into Photoshop, you can do a lot of different stuff. You can apply actual textures to things. You can do a lot with underlighting and backlighting, which I chose not to do with this. And we're actually going to, now that I've got this wrapped up, I'm going to actually make the wallpapers, and you'll see kind of the thought process here. Now how I do the wallpapers is I create a 72 dpi image, blank canvas in the dimensions that I want. For example, 1280 by 1024, which is, I have two monitors, so 1020 by 1280 by 1024 is one monitor, and that's what I'm working with here. And the other is 1024 by 768. Actually, I think I started with the 1024 by 768, and once I've got the size, then I bump it up to 300 dpi, and I've imported what I want here. And I'm basically, rambling through, picking fonts, picking colors, trying to see what I think is going to look good. Now, the comic logo I actually have in an Illustrator file, and I usually will just go grab that whenever I want. But since I've already got a colored version that I know of, that I've already got colored in another wallpaper, I'm grabbing that. And so I'm basically just dragging it over from that one and resizing it to fit, because it's the color that I wanted, and that saves me from having to do any extra work. And as I was going through this, like I said, this was kind of on the fly. I wasn't sure what direction I was wanting to go with some of this, so I was kind of just, bullying along and working with my composition. I knew I needed the logo, I knew I needed the web address, and I knew I wanted to be holiday related, so red and green, of course, the supplementary Christmas colors. And this is a neat little trick you can play with. I've done a lot with this. Basically, use the drop shadow blending option once you've got it in there. But when I do it, I don't just leave it clipped. I break it away from them so that I can use transform on the shadows and basically move them into the perspective or warp them the way that I need them, so they look more natural and not just like floating objects on a screen. So I basically wanted to kind of see what I'm doing here. I'm pulling it down because I've established the light sources coming from the mid to upper left on the viewer's side of the camera. So I wanted to make sure that once I got all that in there, that the shadows conform to that. And now that I've got one wallpaper done, I'm going to take the elements that I've done and move them over to the second wallpaper, which is slightly different in dimension. Like I said, I started with the 1024 by 768, and this is going to be the 1280 by 1024. Now, I don't strive to get everything exactly identical because the dimensions are different. It's going to be different anyway. So I take each element as I go and I move them over and I resize them how I need to get them into the second wallpaper. So I always start with one, and then I just basically, once I've got one down, I move it over. Now, I decided after I was wrapping this up that it was not quite, it was still kind of plain. So you're going to see me add a string of holiday lights, and this is going to be a neat little extra little thing that I'm going to tie in and explain how I do this, because this is how I do my glows. And anybody who's familiar with like Ryan Weber and Ryan versus Dorkman will appreciate at least the concept behind this, because it's built off of the lightsaber glow idea, but it works really well for lighting lights, blinking lights, flashing lights, things you want really bright. Now I made this real simple. I just grabbed a black brush and just dragged it across the screen and then threw in white lights. Now I started to do this and I realized I needed to separate it into a second separate layer. Now what you do is you soften the edges, blur 1 to 2 pixels on your white, and then that was where I goofed up, and I realized that I needed to go back and do them on a separate layer. Once you get your lights, whatever your light is going to be, down, blur it 1 to 2 pixels, then duplicate it 3 times. And if you don't want to right click and duplicate layer, okay, you can hit Control J on the layer 3 times and it'll duplicate that layer 3 times. And once you've got the 3 duplicates, pick up a certain amount of blend. Now this is the important part. Underneath the bottommost layer of those white lights, make a black layer instead of the screen mode. Now go in and take your lights and blur them. I think I did 5, 10, and 15. So I had an initial 2, which is the core of the light, 5 underneath that and a Gaussian blur, 10 underneath that as a Gaussian blur, 15 under that as a Gaussian blur. And I did it, and once I've done with that, I merge it all down to that black layer. Now this is color balance, and I'm using color balance in midtones and highlights only. Midtones, I bring it all the way up to what I want in the 100 yellow, and then on the highlights only half as much. The only exception is red. Red really shines out really bright if you do 100 on both midtones and highlights. And you can actually tinker with these sliders and come up with a bunch of neat colors. Now, since I had already done most of this, and I turned around and I said, okay, I did the lights, now I need to take the lights and I bring them over to the other wallpaper. Now, because I separated into 2 layers and I wanted to keep the effect of the lights, I needed to bring over the lights and the cabling, the line of lights. So I brought over the lights and I brought over the cabling, and once I got them together, I linked them and I resized them so that I could fit it all together. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this tutorial, and I will see you guys later on when I have another one for you. You guys enjoy.